My name is Allison Riney. I'm going to give you guys a little intro to our case and our plan before we get into the lesson plans. Our case was Stephen. He's a 14-year-old with Down syndrome. His only problems are W for L and W for R substitutions. So since he has no other issues reported, we decided to treat those substitutions as an articulation disorder. We decided to use Van Riper's traditional approach to articulation therapy. Here are the steps to the traditional approach as we learned in class: ear training, production training, stabilization, transfer and carryover, and maintenance. We did find several articles to support some of our clinical decisions. The first one found that even one articulation error can have serious consequences for a teenager, especially socially. This applies to Stephen because even though he only has a couple of errors, he still needs therapy. The second one addresses the need for the use of visuals in therapy with individuals with Down syndrome, and you'll see later in our lesson plans that we do use a lot of visuals. The third one talks about the importance of using reading to aid language and memory, and the last one is just some evidence to support the traditional approach. Stephen's case history mentioned that he made very good progress with his last SLP, and we assumed that his last SLP also used the traditional approach. So what we did was decide to reestablish the phonemes using ear training and production training, and then move back into production training and stabilization at the word level. So here's a summary of our plan. We first plan to reestablish the L and R phonemes using phonetic placement training and maybe successive approximation. And then following establishment, we'll be able to stabilize those sounds and the initial and final positions of syllables and words throughout our 2 sessions. And now Kelly and Natasha are going to tell you guys about the reading lesson plan.
Hello, my name is Kelly Williams, and I'm going to be walking you through the reading goals and objectives and also give you a brief overview of our reading lesson activity as well as the Common Core standards that coincide with the activity. Our first goal is for Stephen to correctly produce the R phoneme. Our first objective will be for Stephen to produce the R phoneme in the initial position of the word when given visual and verbal cues with 90% accuracy over 3 consecutive sessions. We will be giving him a multitude of visual and verbal cues throughout the activity. And the second objective is the same but with the final position of the word. Our second goal is Stephen will produce the L phoneme correctly. And the first objective is Stephen will produce the L phoneme in the initial position, given the same visual and verbal cues with 90% accuracy over 3 consecutive sessions. And then again, the L phoneme in the final position. We chose our activity based on Stephen's current book, To Kill a Mockingbird. And what we will do is each chapter we will choose a paragraph that contains a high occurrence of the target sounds L and R. We're going to be picking vocabulary out of these paragraphs and highlighting them, and Stephen will be practicing these highlighted words as well as looking up their definitions and writing them down in his interactive journal. The vocabulary words will also coincide with a picture of his choosing that he can decorate any way he wants to within his journal. And Stephen will take his journal home, and for homework he will finish defining the vocabulary words. And once he comes back, we will practice the vocabulary words. We will practice them in sentences. And after every 2 chapters are completed, we will play a game of Jeopardy wherein the vocabulary words are the answers. And the Common Core state standards that are fitting for this activity, the first one is to determine the meaning of words and phrases as they are used in a text, including figurative, connotative, and technical meanings. Analyze the impact of specific word choices on meaning and tone, including analogies or allusions to other texts. It's important for Stephen to be able to read his excerpts and be able to understand what it means, as well as understand how it pertains to the text in whole, not just in that paragraph. The next Common Core state standard that we found fitting for the activity is to analyze and detail the structure of a specific paragraph in a text, including the role of particular sentences in developing and refining a key context. Again, we want Stephen to be able to pick apart a paragraph and be able to take the defining words and break them down and define them. And overall, we would like Stephen to become more fluent in his L and R, both at the word level and furthermore at the sentence level. And now Natasha will be explaining more in depth the reading lesson plan as well as the step-by-step procedures we will follow.
Hi, this is Natasha Guthrie, and I'm going to walk you through the step-by-step of our reading curriculum. Since isolation and syllables were previously mastered, our plan is to introduce Stephen to word level. However, to make sure he hasn't regressed at all, we will have a brief overview to make sure he can still identify target sounds and produce them up to the word level, and have him judge correct productions versus incorrect productions. Once we have established that Stephen is indeed ready for his targets at word level, we will use the reading journal based on Stephen's current reading curriculum. This can be continually used for subsequent therapy sessions by adding new chapters and new books to keep him actively involved. He's always going to be practicing his target sounds, and it will reinforce his classroom curriculum. This will aid in making meaningful productions and have communicative benefits because his lessons are based on real words that he is exposed to daily. We'll begin by using highlighted words from his excerpt from his book that has his target sounds. Correct productions will be modeled several times along with proper placement of articulators. Stephen will then copy the clinician and say the target words, moving from successive approximations into establishing target words through phonetic context to help facilitate the correct target. Correct productions will be acknowledged, and target sounds and words will consistently be highlighted and emphasized throughout the activity. He will then use vocabulary words from text as a supplemental activity to reinforce curriculum and his targets. The words will be defined along with pictures. For homework, Stephen will take his journal with him, write a sentence for each vocabulary word while producing his targets with careful consideration. His parents or caregiver will be educated on how Stephen can produce his targets correctly at home. Each time he comes back, he will have a new passage and a review of previous vocabulary along with new vocabulary within a Jeopardy game. As Stephen progresses through this notebook, he will build up to more complex context, for example, phrases, sentences, and eventually conversation. Once his productions are established and stabilized, in all contexts, we will begin the maintenance phase, and Stephen can begin self-monitoring. Now, moving on to the reading lesson plan. This is just a brief overview of the phonemes and what position Stephen will correctly produce them in. He will be given visual and verbal cues and modeling to help him along. He will only use his interactive journal, his excerpts from the book, vocabulary word lists, and pictures, and we're hoping to get him up to 90% mastery. Right here is an example of the materials and a picture of an interactive reading journal. For example, we chose To Kill a Mockingbird for his grade level. And you can see that the words in the text are highlighted. All of the words highlighted are his target words with his target sounds. The pictures also are demonstrative of his vocabulary words in the text, but they are only vocabulary that contains target sounds, and those are the words he will work on with sentences and take home for homework so that he'll be ready for the next lesson when he comes back. Thank you.
Hi, this is Jane, and I'm going to be taking on the science lesson in our presentation. So we created some pretty basic goals for this lesson. We're focusing on both phonemes, the R and the L. And for each goal, we have the goal of Stephen producing that phoneme in the initial or final position of words when he's given visual and verbal cues with 90% accuracy over 3 consecutive sessions. And we kept this consistent with the R in the initial position, R in word final position, L in the initial position, and L in word final position. And we wanted to shoot pretty high with the goal because Stephen is 14 and he really doesn't have any other issues. So we wanted to make sure, he would be able to leave these sessions with a really great track record as far as production goes. So for the lesson itself, we created a pretty fun activity where Stephen is going to learn about the world's deadliest snakes while targeting these 2 phonemes, and he is going to create a map and answer some questions about the snakes. And this dovetailed pretty nicely with a Common Core standard that involves putting information that's somewhat technical and learned in a text into a more visual format. In this case, it includes pictures and a map, but it could be other things like they say, graph, table, flowchart, etc. Now, as far as the actual steps, we are going to do some perceptual training at the discrimination level. Hopefully that won't take too long. We're mostly going to focus on the word level because it's been indicated that that would probably be the most effective. And we're going to go through that excerpt from The World's Deadliest Snakes. We pared down the excerpt quite a bit to focus on these phonemes and just certain snakes. It was a little bit more general before. And then we're going to have Stephen produce those targets and pay attention to the target words. We will be giving visual and tactile cues as needed and providing models using pairs if some of these production errors keep going. Hopefully the science activity can help Stephen stabilize correct production of these phonemes, and he should really enjoy it too and definitely learn a little bit about snakes. We just made a chart with our goals, the procedures we'll be using for each goal, and the materials, which you can see on the next slide. We have the actual excerpt with a bunch of the words that we're going to target highlighted. We have a map of the world where he can label the continents and put the snakes in their correct places. And then we have our sources, of course. We really honed in on sources that had actual research on children who do have Downs and the way that they learn and some of their, unique advantages and disadvantages as it comes to, socializing and memory. And then we included a little bit about the different impact of even a small artic error in, school-aged kids and how it actually would be important for him to have intervention here. So feel free to check these out if you're interested, and we really look forward to seeing your presentations. Thank you so much.